This week, we were treated to this wonderful picture in our media. It's our esteemed Prime Minister riding on the Gold Coast light rail with the Premier of Queensland, Stephen Smiles Miles. The picture was in a tweet from the Labor Party on the campaign trail for the October 26 Queensland election with the caption, "Just two blokes catching the Gold Coast light rail for 50 cents. How good?" Yes, how good. This photo for me really sums up the whole problem with Australian politics right now. We've got too many voters, particularly young ones, who don't really understand how government works, how our economy works, where money comes from, and how government is paid for. You know, economics is like gravity. It's a law that can't be defied, despite what they sing in Wicked the musical. Defying gravity is a supernatural fantasy best left to the Wicked Witch of the West. You can't defy science and reality, and the economic reality is that it costs a lot more than 50 cents per passenger to run trains and buses. So when governments surprisingly tell us right before elections that they're suddenly reducing the price of government services, you should take it with a massive pinch of salt. Actually, we should be highly offended because they're taking us for fools, or at least they think they're taking us for fools because we're not as dumb as they like to think anymore. These out-of-touch elites in the Labor Party. By midday, the day after this tweet was posted, it had 350 comments. 99% of them were negative. It might have actually been 100%. I didn't have time to check them all, but I actually could not find one positive reply, and it was very hard to find any polite ones. There were many references to the movie Dumb and Dumber, and lots of unkind comments about how both of these guys were on a train heading right off the political landscape. What polite enough ones to show you here there were had this sort of sentiment. "Yeah, two blokes, 50 cents short of the dollar," says Country Healer. "Yeah, everyone else who can't use it pays. That's great," writes Toby Campbell, someone who does apparently understand basic economics. Giles Baldwin also understands economics. He says, "Thanks to the taxpayer." Exactly. People really are waking up now. I still worry a little bit about the young though. Even though we saw this happen in the news poll this week. The coalition, led by Peter Dutton, is now ahead in the first poll since the election on a two-party preferred basis, 51 to 49. What does that mean, two-party preferred? It means what the pollsters think is likely to happen after all the preferences are distributed in an election from the votes for all the minor parties. They usually use the data from the previous federal elections preference flows to kind of work that out as best they can, then they apply it to the survey. Those raw numbers across the top in this graphic, put together by the smart young people at 6 News and from the Australians news poll originally, those raw numbers across the top show that Labor is really lagging in support. That's the primary vote. Okay, that's the people who would put number one beside that party on the ballot. Fewer than 1/3 of us Aussies are backing the Labor Party now. Even fewer than 2 in 5 Aussies could summon up support for the Liberal National Coalition. They sit at just 38%. One Nation is up a point at 7%, but most disturbing to me is that the Greens still sit at 12%. The Greens are not an environmental party, remember. They are a socialist party supporting radical left-wing ideas very publicly, pretending to be an environmental party. They support protesters calling for the elimination of Israel completely. They support shoplifting as a way to reduce poverty. They support squatting as a way to reduce homelessness. They have no respect for property rights. They think open borders and endless immigration is right for our country. They want free this and free that, but they never have a plan as to how to grow the economy to pay for any of that, except tax the rich and tax the corporations. Even though most corporations make single-digit profits, many lose money, and the number of rich people in the country is so small that if you tax them all at 90%, you'd barely pay the interest bill on our government debt for 1 year. The Greens are a disgrace. They're grifters playing on your kindness and your good nature to worm their way into power. So how come they're at 12%? Well, there's two types of Green voters. There's the young ones who you can kind of excuse for their ignorance of economics. They never get taught it properly at school, and they think the government controls all the money and can just wave a magic wand and make stuff free or cheaper. And then there's the second type of green voter, the ones I really can't stand, the ones who have absolutely no excuse. The boomers and Gen Xers who should know better but haven't grown up yet. They vote with their feels and not their brains. And there's just too many of them in our country. And it is time they grew up. Like the rich people in big houses in my leafy neighborhood with Greens signs out front. They've forgotten somehow how they made all their money. It was the free market liberal economic system, not socialism, kiddies. Or the ones who just want to seem cool and hip with the grandkids. Or the ones who are totally self-interested NIMBYs, not in my backyard people, and they just don't want any more development in their nice leafy suburb, ruining the value of their beautiful multi-million-dollar home. They are the most despicable mob of the despicable mob of all. The fact is that we are in pretty big trouble as a nation. We have federal government debt heading for $1 trillion, and we have Victoria State at $250 billion and Queensland heading for $200 billion. This is unprecedented and totally unsustainable. We're not the only country in this mess, but we are well up there. The US has a similar problem, and a leading American economist, Dr. Joshua Rao, professor of finance at Stanford University, is so concerned that he put out a video this week on the PragerU Education channel explaining why big government leads to big problems.
By 1930, government spending at all levels, federal, state, and local, was just 12% of America's economic output. By 2020, it was 45%. And it's not just spending. The Federal Register, the list of all federal regulations, grew from 2,600 pages in 1936 to 90,000 in 2023. Administration after administration, decade after decade, the U.S. government just keeps getting bigger.
And so does ours. According to data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics released at the end of last month, our total spending in Australia by all levels of government, federal, state and local, every year has topped $1 trillion at $1,066,000 million. $1,066,000 million. And the revenue all the governments bring in every year now stands at just a teeny bit more than that. So that means government is costing us $40,000 a year for every man, woman and child in Australia. Only about 12 million people pay income tax though, and they cop the brunt of this. But all of us pay tax through other means. We pay tax on the corporations through what we pay when we buy their stuff. We pay GST. We pay all sorts of taxes and charges and fines imposed by governments. Notice how they're getting crazily out of proportion to the offence. But it just keeps going up and up and up as government gets bigger and bigger and bigger. After all, why would any government want to reduce itself in size and power? What's the incentive for that? The only incentive would be to help them get elected if we voters actually valued less government and less government spending. But we don't. We keep rewarding the parties and the politicians that say they will spend more and give us more free stuff, which of course everyone with half a brain realizes isn't free. Back to the American example for a moment.
Proponents of bigger government say that as America's challenges grow, the only entity that can meet these challenges is the government. Are they right? Let's consider three major areas of spending: education, healthcare, and social welfare. Education comprises about 14% of all government spending. From 1966 to 2016, adjusted for inflation, spending per student nearly tripled, from $4,700 to almost $14,000. Has student performance nearly tripled? Nope.
Another big area of government spending is Medicare. Its equivalent in America is Medicaid, and only the needy and the elderly get it over there. Now, Britain has a system of total public health care called the NHS, which is broke, and health services are in an absolutely terrible state. In America, is Medicaid achieving better outcomes?
In a 2013 paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, researchers studied the expansion of Medicaid coverage for low-income adults in Oregon. They found that Medicaid coverage generated no significant improvements in physical health outcomes. The results are also disappointing for the federal welfare programs that comprise America's broad social safety net. These programs make up more than 20% of all government spending. In 2022, the federal government spent $9,000 per household on 80 different welfare programs. But these programs, in addition to mind-blowing costs, have all sorts of unintended consequences. For example, Americans have been famous for their mobility, their eagerness to follow opportunity wherever it takes them. But a 2018 Yale Law School study found that welfare programs often discourage low-income people from relocating to find better-paying jobs. Why? Because they don't want to lose the benefits they're getting in their state.
It makes sense. In fact, lots of productive people have left the high-tax, high-debt states like California, while lots of people who want welfare have moved there. So Professor Rao says all this government spending isn't making Americans smarter, healthier, or wealthier.
Maybe money isn't the problem. Maybe government isn't the answer. There is one more big factor to consider. All this non-productive government spending has landed us deeply in debt.
Oh yeah, we know all about that in Australia. Add up the debt of our federal and state government and we are well over the $1.5 trillion mark. It's unprecedented. And let's not talk about the annual interest bill on that debt. Now, the economists will say, oh, Australia's debt is a lower share of our GDP than other countries. And that's true, but we have one of the highest household mortgage debt levels in the world. So that private debt kind of cancels us out. What we need the kids to understand is that those 50-cent bus fares and all the government handouts are things that they will be paying off in the future. So they're paying for us. It's a disgraceful act of wealth transfer from the young to the old. That's not the way it's supposed to go in the natural order of things. It's supposed to be the other way around. But the young keep voting for the left. They keep voting for Labor and the Greens, buying the dumb lies that the Greens can pay for everything by taxing the rich and the evil corporations. It is a diabolically evil lie of deception from the left. And what makes it really immoral and sick is that the people at the top of these political parties, at least, maybe not all the members, but the people at the top making these strategies, they actually know it.
The big government crowd that dug this hole has an answer for how to climb out. Tax the rich. Let's see what would happen if we did. A Cato Institute study considered what would happen if the government taxed 100% of all earnings above $500,000. Putting aside the absurdity of such an action, the study found that we would still be $200 billion short of covering the federal budget. And that assumes people wouldn't change their behavior in response to such confiscatory taxes. Why would anybody try to make a lot of money if they couldn't keep it?
Yeah, good point. But isn't it funny that even if we did tax all the evil rich people 100% of their earnings, it would hardly scratch the surface of what the government spends, or should I say wastes. Professor Rao says we can get out of this mess by simply remembering the message of Ronald Reagan, that government is not the solution to our problems, government is the problem.
For America's first 160 years, until President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, the government played a remarkably modest role in Americans' lives, and the nation prospered. The world had never seen anything like it. Even as the government has ballooned over the past 9 decades, it has not been able to stamp out Americans' knack for ingenuity and innovation. But at some point, something will have to give. No great civilization has survived the enormous levels of debt that the U.S. government is now assuming. Why would we be different?
That video is available in full on the PragerU website at prageru.com. If we in Australia think we're any different, we're kidding ourselves. We're also hugely tied to the United States economically. We're also tied to Britain and China, but their economic stories and size of government are much, much worse. We need to decide. We've got an ACT election coming up this weekend. We've got the Queensland election coming up next weekend. Labor and the Greens are in power in the ACT, and they'll probably stay that way because that is, Canberra is the city of bureaucrats, right? We can expect that. But we've got to ask ourselves, do we really want Greens, more Greens? As people move away from the major party, voting Green is really a very, very dangerous thing. Are we going to go down this socialist path? Are we going to buy into that simplistic Greens narrative? Are we that stupid of tax the rich, tax the evil corporations? That's how they're going to pay for everything, is it? Or are we going to make an effort to move back to small government and a culture of people who celebrate business success, celebrate individuals, celebrate our best and brightest, and appreciate the hierarchies instead of tearing them down and seeking equality of everything? If we're going down the socialist path and making equality our goal, then we're in big trouble. Did you know that for every 2 to 3 teachers in Australia working hard in classrooms across the country, there is one taxpayer-funded bureaucrat sitting behind a desk doing admin and making and enforcing rules and regulations that make those teachers' jobs even harder? That's right, one bureaucrat for every 2 to 3 frontline teachers. That's how bloated our public service has become. But you'll never hear about it from the regular teachers' unions because they also represent many of those public servants. So says the leading alternative teachers' union in Australia, the TPAA. If you're a teacher, it's time to change to a union that will not only look after you without using your money to support the Labor Party, but which is taking on the government education system to sidestep those bureaucrats and use the savings to pay all teachers 25% more. The current waste must stop. All the red tape doesn't just suck up resources and time, it actually takes the teachers away from teaching our kids, and it wastes their time filling in crazy paperwork for meddling bureaucrats. So join the union that will actually stand up against big bloated government. Join the TPAA, the Teachers Professional Association of Australia. To find out more, just Google TPAA. The TPAA's fees are half the price because none of your money goes to any political party. And as an Other Side viewer, if you use our special code OTHERSIDE1 when you sign up, you'll get a further $100 off your first year's fees as a rebate on your first payments. Go to tpaa.redunion.com.au, tpaa.redunion.com.au to sign up now for a better union and support the Other Side too by supporting our sponsors. Thank you, teachers, you legends. If you like that clip, there's more where that came from in our full show, The Other Side. You can watch it right here, the latest episode. And please subscribe to our channel by pressing the subscribe button right here or down here. And remember to click that notification bell too. It all helps. Join us and become part of The Other Side.